What would you do if the gods demanded your life? In a forgotten village, where myths and reality intertwine, a young man named David stands face to face with the wrath of a five-headed serpent and the haunting truth of a sin he never intended to commit. But can forgiveness rewrite fate? Or will the shadows of legend consume them all? Our story begins on a freezing morning in New York City, where towering skyscrapers reflected the pale light of a dreary winter. This city, with streets that never sleep and a relentless pace of life, is a melting pot of opportunities and challenges. It's a place where dreams are born, and just as easily, where they can fade into the shadows without perseverance and courage. David, a young black man and a recent graduate of the prestigious Brooklyn College, stood on the sidewalk outside his dormitory. In his hand, he clutched a letter he had just received. His heart swelled with excitement, a feeling of exhilaration rising within him, as if a new door had swung open, revealing a world entirely different from the one he'd always known. That letter. It was an invitation to join the Youth Empowerment Corps, a special volunteer program he had dreamed of joining for years. Though well acquainted with the city's hustle and bustle, where he had been born and raised, David always felt he was a part of something more, a vibrant black community in Brooklyn, one that lived amid urban struggles but preserved its rich cultural values. Every passing day he became acutely aware that no matter how much success he achieved, there was a part of life he had yet to discover. A world beyond the lively streets where he could truly find himself and contribute to society in deeper ways. David had heard stories about places like Maryland and Georgia, regions where African communities thrived, and traditional values were cherished. He dreamed of traveling, embarking on journeys to unfamiliar lands, and hearing tales shrouded in mystery, stories he had only read about in books or overheard by the fireside. He knew this was his chance not only to explore new places, but to immerse himself in rich cultures and carve a new path for himself. "This is my chance," David whispered to himself, holding the letter up once more, rereading the words. He was ready to leave the safety of Brooklyn, the city he'd known his entire life, to face new challenges, meet new people, and embark on an adventure he knew would forever change his life. He thought back to evenings as a student, sitting with friends, sharing dreams of a better world, a world where the black community could flourish, where each of them could take pride in their roots and strength. David always felt he had a mission greater than just living in the city. He wanted to do something meaningful, something transformative for his community. Joining this program was the first step on that journey. When David arrived at the region where he would begin his volunteer work, it felt like stepping into an entirely different world. His journey had taken him through bustling streets, which gradually gave way to quiet wilderness, places where nature remained untamed, untouched by modernization. Upon arrival, he met a group of other volunteers. Among them was Amanda, a woman from a distant southern city. Amanda had fair skin and eyes that sparkled with curiosity. She seemed unfazed by the rough paths or the weathered houses along the trail leading to the camp. Yet there was a quiet confidence in her gaze, tinged with a mysterious quality, as though she had faced many challenges in her life. David and Amanda quickly bonded, exploring this unfamiliar land together. Amanda shared stories about her family in the South and the traditions they had preserved for generations. She spoke of the struggles she faced moving from a bustling city to a place as remote as this, so vastly different from everything she had known. "You know, David," Amanda said one night as they sat by the fire, "the people here hold on to traditions we've only read about in books. There are stories about gods you couldn't even imagine. One of those is the tale of the snake goddess." David stared into the flickering flames, then turned to Amanda. "The snake goddess? What are you talking about?" he asked, his curiosity piqued. Amanda smiled faintly, then spoke with seriousness. "There's a remote village in the south where they revere snakes as sacred beings. They believe snakes are messengers of the gods, and anyone who dares harm them faces severe punishment." A shiver ran down David's spine as he listened, but his curiosity only deepened. "So, can we see these snakes?" he asked. Amanda paused for a long moment before answering, her tone solemn. Maybe. If we delve deep enough into this land, we might find things we've never imagined. The next day, the volunteer group was divided into smaller teams to explore different parts of the village. David and Amanda were assigned to a remote settlement where traditions were strictly upheld. The journey began with light-hearted chatter, but grew quieter as they ventured deeper into the dense forest, enveloped in an eerie silence. Eventually they arrived at an isolated clearing. There they were led to an ancient house where locals had gathered to perform an age-old ritual. At the entrance stood an elderly woman with dark, weathered skin and piercing eyes. "Welcome," she said, her voice stern and commanding. "I am Madame Okafor. Here, we honor traditions passed down for thousands of years. These traditions will help you understand life and how we perceive the world." Madame Okafor began sharing the secrets she knew, legends passed down by her grandmother. Among them, the tale of the snake goddess captivated David and Amanda the most. She explained that the snakes in this village were integral to their religion and culture. To kill a snake, she said, would be a grave insult to the snake goddess, with consequences beyond imagination. "You see," Madame Okafor said, her voice laden with gravity, "in this world, not everything is as it seems. Behind every legend, every story, lies a truth you've never known. Today, you will witness that truth." As her words sank in, a chill ran down David's spine. He couldn't fathom what he might face, but her story held him spellbound. "Are these snakes truly sacred?" David asked, his voice steady but tinged with unease. "Yes," Madame Okafor replied. "They are the messengers of the snake goddess. If you wish to understand our culture, you must first understand the deep respect we have for them." At that moment, a strange sound came from within the house, drawing everyone's attention. A massive snake, over 2 meters long, emerged, coiling itself like a mystical guardian. The group stood frozen, not daring to move. The snake's eyes locked onto David's, sending a wave of fear through him. "This is the snake you will encounter," Madame Okafor said, "and you must learn to respect it if you wish to live in harmony with us." That day, the golden sunlight bathed the training camp, illuminating layers of yellow sand and lush green palms in a serene, almost mystical silence. Beneath the clear blue sky, the camp lay hidden within the stillness of nature, a place where ancient tales of the land's power and its deities still echoed. David, a young man filled with dreams, stepped off the bus, his heart brimming with anticipation. He was a city boy from Brooklyn, a place that never slept, where everything moved at a relentless pace. But here, amidst the untamed wilderness, he felt as though he had entered an entirely different world. David glanced around, a sense of excitement rising within him. This was where his new adventure would begin, a place where he wouldn't just learn, but where he would face challenges no one from Brooklyn had ever warned him about. His first impression of the area wasn't just its vast, open fields, but the allure of an untold story waiting to be discovered. As he walked into the camp, a striking young woman caught his attention. Her skin glistened like polished granite, her eyes sparkled like stars in the night, and her natural curls exuded a confidence that was undeniably strong. Amanda. Her name was unfamiliar, yet it felt oddly comforting, like a fresh breeze brushing against him for the first time. "Hi, I'm Amanda," she said with a warm smile, shaking David's hand firmly as though transferring some of her energy to him. "Where are you from? Your accent, it sounds familiar." David felt an instant connection, something within him urging him to open up, though he didn't quite know why. "I'm from Brooklyn," he replied, his gaze fixed on the captivating woman before him. "And you?" Amanda chuckled softly, her eyes twinkling like sunlight streaming through leaves. "Washington," she said, pausing momentarily. "But I can recognize a Brooklyn accent right away. You know, I heard we'll be learning about some fascinating traditions from distant lands here. Maybe even mysterious tales about mermaids, guardian spirits, and ancient deities. David was taken aback. Her words made him feel as if he was stepping into a fairy tale, a strange and wondrous world he had only encountered in myths. Mermaids? Do you really think they exist? Amanda looked at him with a knowing smile, her gaze holding a hint of challenge, as if testing whether he had the courage to explore these tales. Maybe they're just legends, she said, her voice lowering to a mysterious tone. But here, these stories have been passed down for generations. They're a part of life, the very soul of this land. A shiver ran down David's spine, but he couldn't tear his eyes away from Amanda. Her words were like a doorway, leading him into a realm of mysteries he had never dared to imagine. Guardian spirits? Are they real too? He asked, his voice trembling with curiosity. Amanda nodded, her eyes deepening, as though recalling memories long forgotten. Yes, these spirits are said to guard sacred lands, protecting them from intruders. And the tales about them? They're never fully told because their power can only be seen by those who truly understand. David felt a strange fire ignite within him. He wasn't just hearing these stories, he felt as though he were touching a fragment of them. That feeling burned brightly in his chest, urging him to uncover these secrets, to delve deeper. Their conversation continued, and David began to realize that even as a boy from the bustling city, he was slowly immersing himself in traditions and legends he had never known. Amanda, with her tales of deities and guardian spirits, had unlocked a door to an insatiable curiosity within him. Each word she spoke felt like the heartbeat of an entire world. In the days that followed, David and Amanda explored the land together. Each morning, David awoke feeling the stark difference from everything he had ever known. The air here seemed to hum with a peculiar energy, and every tree, every path, seemed to carry its own story. One afternoon, as they wandered through the forest near the camp, Amanda suddenly stopped and turned to David. Her eyes held an unusual seriousness. "David," she said, her voice low, "do you realize the stories I've been telling you aren't just ordinary tales? They hold power. The mermaids, the guardian spirits, they're all part of this world." David stared at her, his eyes never leaving hers. "So, they're real? These mermaids? Where do they live?" Amanda smiled, but her smile was enigmatic, as though hiding a secret. "We'll know when the time comes, but don't let these stories remain mere legends. They're real, if only you open your heart and believe." David felt as though he was standing on the edge of a new world, where the inexplicable was not only possible, but tangible. Each step he took, every conversation with Amanda, felt like he was venturing further into an adventure with no return. That evening, as they sat around the campfire, Amanda shared another tale, a story about a remote village by the sea where mermaids were said to have once lived. "That village," Amanda said, her voice carrying a hint of reverence, "is where all these mysteries begin. Only the brave can enter, but not everyone returns." A cold breeze brushed past David, but he couldn't look away from Amanda's mesmerizing storytelling. He wanted to know more, to reach out and touch these mysteries. "Can we go there?" he asked, his voice filled with determination. Amanda looked at him, her eyes seeming to anticipate his question. "If you truly wish to, we can. But be ready because it's not a place easily reached." Her words were a challenge, and David, driven by his unyielding thirst for discovery, couldn't stop himself. He knew this journey would change him forever, and nothing could hold him back. David, a young man from New York City, was assigned to a remote village in southern Texas. This village, nestled by a vast coastline, was steeped in mysterious tales of mermaids and gods, passed down through countless generations. It was a place where stories, once thought to exist only in ancient texts, had become an integral part of daily life. The village, though beautiful and tranquil, harboured deep, unfathomable secrets that few outsiders could ever comprehend. When David arrived, he was struck by the village's eerie stillness. There were no rumbling engines, no bright city lights illuminating the night, only simple houses, sandy paths stretching to the sea and the cool, salty breeze drifting in from the ocean. The villagers, predominantly black, lived in harmony, respecting the ancient traditions handed down by their ancestors. Age-old customs persisted, and legends of gods, battles with divine forces and mermaids were still told from one generation to the next. Despite its calm appearance, David sensed a tension in the air. The villagers were not always forthcoming. At times, their eyes lingered on him with suspicion. During his first few days, he frequently overheard murmurs about a woman named Linda. She was one of David's students, but she was unlike anyone he had ever met. The stories surrounding her stirred something in him. Was she truly an ordinary person? One morning, David decided to walk along the coastline, eager to breathe in the fresh sea air and learn more about the village. As he strolled down the sandy path, admiring the breathtaking ocean view, a strange feeling tugged at him, pulling him towards something unknown. Curiosity grew in his chest, inexplicable and persistent. From a distance, he spotted a familiar figure. It was Linda. She stood alone, gazing out at the ocean, her eyes distant. A peculiar smile played on her lips, but it wasn't a typical smile. There was something enigmatic, almost otherworldly, in her expression and gaze. Linda was unlike anyone else in the village. She seemed to carry a secret no one else could grasp. David approached cautiously, maintaining some distance. The air around him grew heavier, charged with an energy he couldn't understand. Linda turned, and when her eyes met his, a strange chill swept through his body, as if the very air had turned icy. "What are you doing here?" David asked, trying to keep his voice steady, though he couldn't mask the tension in his tone. Linda didn't respond right away. She smiled faintly, then spoke in a soft yet cryptic voice. "I'm pursuing an ancient secret, one you don't yet understand." She stepped closer, her every movement drawing David further into an unknown realm, one filled with stories he had never heard and wonders he had never dared imagine. David couldn't look away from her. It was as if every tale he'd ever heard about mermaids, guardian spirits, and gods was unfolding before him with Linda at the center. Was she a part of these stories? Or could she even be their embodiment? "A secret?" David repeated, his voice brimming with curiosity and awe. "What kind of secret?" Linda didn't answer immediately. She stood there, her eyes deep as the ocean, gazing at him with a look that both challenged and invited him. "You wouldn't understand," she said softly. "This story is too vast for you to grasp right now, but you will. All you need to do is trust what you feel. You've heard the stories about mermaids, haven't you?" David felt as though Linda's words were pulling him into a bottomless pit. The tales of mermaids, mythical beings he'd only read about in books, now seemed to materialize before him. These wonders, once confined to fantasy, were becoming part of his reality. "Mermaids? Are you serious?" David asked, his voice tinged with skepticism, though his eyes betrayed an undeniable intrigue. Linda smiled, her eyes twinkling like stars. "Not just mermaids. You'll understand when you find the path you're meant to walk." A strange sensation continued to swell within David. The world around him began to blur, as though a veil was slowly lifting to reveal a hidden realm. Linda wasn't just a person. She was part of a story that defied explanation, and he couldn't stop. He had to uncover more. As time passed, Linda's presence grew increasingly enigmatic to David. He began to sense that she wasn't merely a young woman, but a crucial piece of a deeper narrative, one that transcended folklore. She seemed to hold the key to secrets he couldn't ignore. One evening, as the village prepared for an ancient ritual, Linda invited David to join her. She told him it was time for him to learn the truths she had hinted at. David didn't know why, but he felt compelled to follow. Together they ventured into the dark forest, where the faint light of a small oil lamp couldn't dispel the dense shadows. Towering trees loomed overhead, their branches seemingly guarding something forbidden. They reached a clearing where Linda pointed to a stone circle and told David to stand inside. "This is where you'll understand everything," she said with quiet certainty. Yet her eyes held a flicker of mystery, as though she too was confronting something beyond her control. David stepped into the circle and immediately felt a wave of strange energy envelop him. He could sense an otherworldly force pulsating in the air. Closing his eyes, he heard a loud rustling behind him. Turning, he saw a massive snake slithering toward him, a creature unlike any he had ever encountered. "This is the sacred serpent of our land," Linda whispered. "It is a part of the goddess who protects this place." Before David could fully comprehend what was happening, the snake coiled around him as if testing his strength, gauging whether he was worthy of facing it. The air grew heavy with silence, broken only by the snake's low hissing that echoed through the night. David felt as though he was being consumed by forces beyond his understanding. In that moment, he realized that everything he had heard about mermaids, guardian spirits, and the snake goddess wasn't just legend. It was a living reality, one he couldn't escape unless he confronted it head-on. David now faced a pivotal choice: to continue delving into the mysteries Linda had revealed, or to retreat to a quiet life, never daring to confront the unknown. The truth about mythical beings, the snake goddess, and guardian spirits would forever alter him. But did he have the courage to face it all? Christmas had settled over the small seaside village, veiling it in cold, eerie mists that draped the forest, transforming the landscape into something mysterious and enchanting. As darkness fell, the chill of the night couldn't keep the villagers from gathering in the square, where a crackling bonfire cast its golden glow into the festive air. Lanterns hung from tree branches, their warm light pushing back the cold, breathing life into the atmosphere. It was a traditional Christmas Eve, a night for sharing stories, gathering in peace, and praying for blessings. David stood amidst the crowd, sensing an unusual calm that enveloped the village. Everyone had come together, yet he couldn't shake the feeling that something strange was waiting in the shadows. He scanned the square, spotting Amanda and other villagers laughing and chatting, but then his eyes fell upon Linda. She stood by the fire, her face illuminated by its flickering glow. Her eyes sparkled with the firelight, and her smile, enigmatic as always, hinted at knowledge of something beyond David's understanding. David had spoken with Linda before, yet he had never felt a true connection with her. She seemed to belong to a world he couldn't fathom, a world steeped in mystery and myth. Tonight, however, David couldn't deny the change in the air. Tales of mermaids, guardian spirits, and the snake goddess no longer felt like mere legends. They were beginning to take form, as if stepping into reality. As the night deepened and preparations for the festival continued, David felt a shiver run down his spine. The rhythm of drums began to fill the air, and the villagers danced around the fire. None of them, however, could predict how different this Christmas Eve would be from any they had experienced before. Suddenly, the calm shattered. A piercing, monstrous sound tore through the air. The wind howled through the trees, and out of the darkness, a massive figure emerged. It was a colossal snake with 5 heads, each one moving to its own rhythm, like a creature pulled from another world. Its eyes glowed like embers, and its gaze was sharp, chilling, hungry. The villagers screamed and scattered in panic. No one dared approach the beast. Amid the chaos, David stood frozen, unable to take his eyes off the monstrous serpent as it slithered closer. He felt a strange pull, as if an invisible thread bound him to this creature. And then, amidst the fleeing crowd, a familiar figure stepped forward. It was Linda. She walked calmly, unafraid, her movements imbued with a grace that seemed otherworldly. The smile on her lips wasn't that of an ordinary person. It carried an air of mystery, of knowing, as though she held secrets no one else could grasp. David watched her, the strange feeling within him intensifying. "Linda!" he called out, his voice trembling, barely audible in the cold night air. What is happening?" Linda turned to him, her eyes blazing, her smile growing colder, sharper, like a challenge. "You don't understand, David," she said, her tone calm but firm. She stepped closer, her every movement radiating an invisible power. "I'm not who you think I am. I am the daughter of the snake goddess." David's mind reeled. Her words struck him like lightning, leaving him stunned. He couldn't comprehend it. The woman he had spoken to, the one he thought he knew, wasn't human. She was something far greater, something divine. He looked at the serpent, then back at Linda, as a reality he had never imagined began to unfold. Standing before him, Linda no longer resembled the girl he thought he knew. She was a being of mystery and power. Her eyes, once playful, now gleamed with a sharpness that could cut through steel. Her natural curls seemed to shimmer with an energy that resonated with the wind and the sea. Each step she took blended her with the natural world, as though she were one with it. David stood paralyzed, his body rigid, his legs unable to move. "Linda," he stammered, his voice weak. You're the daughter of the snake goddess. Why didn't you tell me?" Linda's smile remained, light, yet chilling. "I didn't hide it from you, David. You just weren't ready to understand." She stepped even closer, her piercing eyes locking onto his. David felt a strange force emanating from her, a power unlike anything he had ever known. The world around him seemed to fade away until only Linda, her words, and the colossal serpent remained. "You've committed an unforgivable sin," Linda continued, her voice void of sympathy. "You killed the daughter of the snake goddess, and now we must all face the consequences." The village fell into a stunned silence. The villagers, so accustomed to ancient traditions and rituals, now looked at David with a mixture of anger and terror. They knew the snake goddess's wrath was no myth. It was real, and anyone who invoked it would pay the price. From the crowd, Chief Oki stepped forward. His eyes burned with sorrow and determination, as though he carried the weight of an irreversible truth. "David," he said, his voice heavy with accusation, "you killed the child of the goddess. Now, we all must bear the cost." A wave of cold washed over David, sinking deep into his bones. He glanced around, seeing no understanding in the eyes that met his. Only anger, only fear. "But I was defending myself," he tried to explain, his voice faltering, drowned by the tension that gripped the square. Chief Oki shook his head. "Doesn't matter. This cannot be undone," he said gravely. "We must offer you as a sacrifice to appease the goddess's fury." The chief's words fell like a hammer, and David felt the ground beneath him give way. He stood powerless, as failure consumed him. Everything he had done, every action taken in self-defense, had spiraled into a catastrophe beyond his control. He had unwittingly plunged everyone into a game of danger he couldn't comprehend. As the night deepened and the stars above bore silent witness to the events below, David stood before the serpent, before the villagers' judgment, and before the snake goddess herself. He knew there was no explanation, no justification that could undo what had been done, but in the depths of his heart he felt a stirring, something he couldn't ignore, something he couldn't abandon. Amid the mystical aura of the village, where ancient legends still resonated through the air, David felt a powerful wave crash over him. The rhythmic pounding of drums echoed like a solemn reminder of the sacredness of this land. As he stood face to face with the colossal serpent, its 4 blazing eyes burning into him with the wrath of a cosmic force, memories from his early days at the training camp flashed through his mind. He remembered the words of Madame Okafor, the head of the camp. She had spoken of those who trespassed on this hallowed ground without respect for its rituals and traditions, rules the local people had preserved for countless generations. She had warned them that every step on this sacred soil, every careless glance, could anger the gods and guardian spirits. "The intruders," she had said, "those who disregard these customs will pay with their lives. Once you violate these traditions, you cannot go back. The spirits will exact their punishment, and no one will save you." Her words, once distant and cautionary, now stood before David as reality. The monstrous serpent and Linda, now revealed as a being of divine power, were undeniable proof. He looked down at his trembling hands, felt the weight of stone pressing against his heart. He realized that he had unknowingly broken an unyielding rule, and now he would pay the price. David's eyes sought Amanda, the one person who had stood by him, the only one he felt he could confide in. She stood motionless among the terrified crowd, her gaze cutting deep into his soul. It was filled with worry and determination. In the depths of his despair, David felt a flicker of something else, gratitude and trust in Amanda. "Amanda," David whispered, his voice tight, his words catching in his throat. "I didn't understand. I didn't know this would happen. I've let things go too far, and now it's too late." Amanda's heart ached as she saw the despair in his eyes. She knew he had made a grave mistake, but she couldn't stand by and let him bear the consequences alone. She couldn't let him sacrifice himself or let everything they had worked toward crumble under the weight of his guilt. "David, no," Amanda said firmly, her voice both steady and warm. "We can still change this. I won't let you be sacrificed." David looked at her, a faint glimmer of hope igniting in his eyes. "But Amanda, what can we do? How can we change this, when I can't even save myself from this punishment?" Amanda stepped closer, took his hand and held it tightly. Her gaze locked onto his, unwavering. "We can't give up, David. Together we'll find a way to face whatever comes next." Her words weren't just comforting. They were a declaration, a refusal to accept the inevitability of fate. David felt the storm of emotions within him settle, replaced by a growing resolve. He couldn't let it end this way. He had to fight, even if it meant grasping at the smallest chance. So, as whispers and murmurs grew louder among the villagers, Chief Oki, the leader of the village, stepped forward. His face was etched with a mixture of sorrow and anger. Approaching the serpent, he turned his fierce gaze on David. "David," the chief began, his voice heavy with the weight of judgment, "you killed the daughter of the goddess. Now we must all face the consequences." David felt a crushing wave of pain roll through him. "I didn't mean to," he stammered, his voice trembling. "I was only trying to defend myself." But his pleas fell on deaf ears. No words could undo what had been done. The fury of the goddess and her guardian spirits had been unleashed, and now the village stood on the precipice of disaster, caught between mercy and vengeance. "This cannot be undone," Chief Oki proclaimed, his voice reverberating through the crowd like a curse. "We have no choice. To appease the goddess's wrath, we must offer him as a sacrifice." Silence enveloped the square. The villagers stood still, paralyzed, their faces painted with fear, anger, and helplessness. Their eyes bore into David, accusing and unrelenting. The death of the snake goddess's daughter could not be forgiven. David felt as though he was being devoured by their stares, and he could do nothing but stand there, frozen. Linda, no longer the girl he once knew, now a mythical figure of immense power, stood watching the exchange between him and the chief. Every step she took, every glance she cast, seemed to challenge the very laws humanity had built. "David," she called, her voice carrying an echo like an ancient chant. "You cannot escape the fate that has been decided." David met her gaze, unable to recognize the person she once was. She belonged to a world he couldn't understand, a world of mythical creatures, protective spirits, and the snake goddess herself. But deep within him, he knew there was no turning back. He had to face what lay ahead and confront the curse he had awakened. When all seemed lost and the crowd's belief in his guilt solidified, Amanda stepped forward once more. Her grip on David's hand tightened, her determination shining like a beacon in the dark. "David," she said softly but firmly, "don't give up. I'm here with you." Her voice was steady, her words like a lifeline in the cold, unyielding night. "We'll find a way to change this together." David looked into her eyes and felt a surge of warmth and strength. "What do we do now?" he asked, his voice no longer laced with despair, but with newfound resolve. "We'll seek out those who can help us," Amanda replied with conviction. "Not everyone is under the snake goddess's control. Together we'll find a way to break this curse." With a determined step forward, Neither of them hesitated. Their journey to seek redemption and salvation began, not just for themselves, but for the entire village. A place where myth and reality had intertwined in an unbreakable knot. The scene in Uli village that night was unforgettable. The villagers gathered around, silent as though bound by an invisible curse. The wind swept in from the sea, carrying a chill that pierced to the bone, but it did nothing to dispel the heavy tension suffocating the air. The faint light from the torches flickered weakly, unable to chase away the dense darkness that surrounded the gathering, casting an eerie, oppressive shadow over everything. Every step David took seemed amplified, the sound of his boots crunching against the ground reverberating like whispers through the towering trees. The stillness only made the weight in his chest grow heavier. He saw the worried, fearful gazes of the villagers, eyes that once looked upon him with warmth but now brimmed with doubt and unease. They said nothing, just stood there, observing him as if he were a foreign being they couldn't comprehend. Each person harbored their own thoughts, yet one sentiment bound them all, the guilt they saw in David. David could feel the cold seep into his skin, though it wasn't from the night air. It was the icy resentment radiating from those around him. He wasn't just an outsider anymore. He was the cursed one, a man marked by an unforgivable sin. His heartbeat thundered in his ears, each thud threatening to break him apart. His eyes darted around, searching desperately for some semblance of support, but all he found was an all-encompassing silence, deafening and absolute. At that moment, the loneliness crashed over him like a relentless wave, swallowing what little hope he clung to. Then, piercing the quiet, Linda stepped out from the shadows. But this was not the Linda he had known. She was no longer the gentle, beautiful woman with a soft smile. What stood before him now was something unrecognizable, a being transformed, emanating the raw, mysterious power of the snake goddess. Her appearance had changed dramatically. Her once bright eyes, now sharp and cutting like blades, bore no resemblance to the warmth he remembered. Those eyes held no kindness, only a challenging, almost arrogant power that seemed beyond mortal understanding. Her form radiated an otherworldly energy, majestic and terrifying, causing the onlookers to instinctively take a step back. "David," Linda spoke, but her voice no longer belonged to the realm of humanity. It rumbled deep, like the echoes of a voice rising from the depths of the ocean. "You have committed an unforgivable sin. You killed my daughter, and now you must pay the price." Her words struck like a cold, merciless wave, relentless and unyielding. Each syllable she uttered cut into David's heart like a blade, stealing his breath. He stared at her, unable to process the truth unfolding before him. She wasn't Linda, not anymore. She was a mythical serpent, a goddess wielding unimaginable power. David opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. He stood frozen, as if every part of him had been turned to stone. As David stood there, condemned, the villagers began to murmur among themselves. Their hushed voices carried a mixture of fear and anger. None dared to raise their voice, yet the resentment in their eyes was unmistakable. They stared at David as though he were a criminal, a sinner beyond redemption. No explanation he could give would change their judgment. Chief Oki, the village leader, stepped forward, his expression heavy with grief and dread. His gaze bore into David like a blade, filled with the weight of betrayal and the fury of a broken covenant. "Linda, daughter of the snake goddess," he began, his voice firm. "We cannot defy fate. He has killed the one we revere. The goddess will never forgive him." The chief's proclamation struck the crowd like a thunderclap. Everyone knew it to be true. The snake goddess's wrath would not be easily appeased. No matter how justified David's actions may have been, he could not escape the fury of such a powerful force. The villagers turned away from him, their faces twisted with anger and disdain. Not one stood by him now. David felt as though he were being cornered, trapped in an inescapable abyss. He hadn't just lost the trust of the community he had once thought of as family. Now, he faced the looming spectre of death itself, handed down by a divine being. "This cannot be undone," Chief Oki declared, his voice resolute, as though he had resigned himself to the inevitable. "We must offer him as a sacrifice to appease the goddess's rage." David had no words left. Every apology, every explanation he might have offered seemed meaningless now. He was no longer part of this community. He had broken the divine order, and now he had to face the consequences. The silence in the village was suffocating, like an unyielding wall that separated David from any chance of hope. Loneliness and despair flooded his heart, drowning him in an overwhelming tide of hopelessness. But in that suffocating moment, a faint light emerged, a single beacon of trust and faith. Amanda. She wasn't among the crowd glaring at him with scorn. She stepped forward, her face resolute, and placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. "David," she whispered, her voice steady, "don't give up. We'll find a way to change your fate." David looked into her eyes, and for the first time that night, he felt a spark of hope. He might not be able to change everything, but he knew he wouldn't endure this alone. "Thank you, Amanda," he said softly, his voice catching. "But how can we change what's already been written?" Amanda's gaze never wavered. "We'll find someone who can help us," she replied firmly. "We can't let the death of the snake goddess's daughter be the end of this story." Together, they resolved not to surrender. They would embark on a journey to break the curse, to rewrite the destiny that had been imposed upon David. And in the days to come, that journey would begin. But the question lingered in the air. Could they truly change everything, or had David's fate been sealed long ago? In the village of Uli, the air was thick and heavy, as if the very space around them was pressing down on every breath. The villagers stood silent, their eyes filled with fear and confusion. David's heart pounded violently in his chest, each beat threatening to burst as he took in the sight of Linda. She was no longer the beautiful girl he once knew. She had become something else, something mystical and powerful, an incarnation of the snake goddess. The words of Chief Oki rang out like a sentence passed down from the heavens, each syllable striking David like a hammer to his soul. He couldn't comprehend how an act of self-defense had brought him to this moment, standing on the precipice of death, his very life demanded as payment. He had done everything he could to protect himself and those around him. But now, it felt as though all hope had crumbled into dust. In this moment, it wasn't just his life on the line, it was the shattering of everything he had believed in. "David," Chief Oki continued, his voice deep and unyielding, "you killed the daughter of the snake goddess. You have defiled our sacred grounds, and now we all must pay the price." David couldn't find the words to respond. He could only stand there staring at Chief Oki and the villagers, their gazes sharp and unrelenting, cutting into him like daggers. He couldn't understand the fury in their eyes or the gravity of what he had done. His actions, though meant to protect, had branded him as a sinner, a man deserving of punishment. He felt as though he were trapped in an iron cage, each bar tightening around him, stealing his breath, crushing his will to fight or flee. In his despair, it was as if everything had been stripped from him. Trust, hope, even his future. Just as all seemed lost, as every eye turned toward David with anger and condemnation, a sudden cry pierced the oppressive silence. A familiar figure burst into the center of the crowd, her eyes blazing with determination and defiance. "We cannot let this happen!" Amanda's voice rang out, trembling with both panic and conviction. She stood before Chief Oki, unflinching, her gaze resolute. David did nothing wrong. He only did what was necessary to survive. Her words cracked like thunder through the tense night. The crowd began to murmur, whispers spreading like wildfire. The villagers exchanged uncertain glances, their resolve faltering. Amanda turned to face Linda, who stood motionless, her eyes glowing with cold, otherworldly light. "Linda," Amanda began, her voice steady yet firm, "I know you are not an ordinary human, but you are still part of us. We have lived together, fought together. We cannot abandon our humanity over a misunderstanding." Amanda's words were like a spark igniting a small flame within the hearts of the villagers. Even Chief Oki hesitated. Though anger and fear ran deep, Amanda's plea reached a part of them long buried. a part that remembered compassion and the humanity they had once upheld. David stood frozen in disbelief. Amanda, the woman he admired for her strength, had stepped forward to defend him, even knowing the risk. Her courage in the face of the village's wrath left him speechless. Linda slowly moved toward Amanda, each step deliberate and commanding. The villagers held their breath, no one daring to speak. Every step Linda took seemed to reverberate through the ground, as though the very earth recognized her power. When she stopped before Amanda, she spoke again. But this time, her voice was softer, tinged with sorrow. It was not the cold, unyielding tone she had used before. It carried a hint of struggle. "You are right, Amanda," Linda murmured, her eyes locking with Amanda's, searching for understanding. "He is not evil, but fate has already been decided, and I cannot change it." The silence that followed was almost unbearable. David looked into Linda's eyes and saw something shifting within her. Gone was the searing rage. In its place was regret, a deep, aching sadness. She lowered her head as if the weight of the situation was too much to bear. Chief Oki stepped forward, his voice heavy with authority and sorrow. "Justice must be served," he said. "But do you understand the cost of mercy? The snake goddess will not forgive so easily." Amanda took a step closer to Linda, her voice gentle yet unwavering. "But we can learn to forgive, not just David, but ourselves." Time seemed to stand still, the weight of her words hanging in the air. The villagers, Chief Oki, even Linda remained motionless, their breath caught in their chests. Then, like a miracle, Linda lowered her hand, the ethereal light surrounding her dimming, softening. She turned to face Chief Oki and the villagers, her voice resolute but no longer harsh. "I will not harm them any more," Linda declared, her tone carrying both finality and hope. "I will take this message to the snake goddess, but things must change. We cannot continue living under the shadow of these curses." Her words washed over the crowd like a cleansing tide, a release from the invisible chains that had bound them. The tension that had gripped the village for so long began to ease. The curses, the judgments, and the threat of death no longer felt inevitable. Perhaps for the first time, forgiveness, understanding, and humanity could prevail. David turned to Amanda, his eyes brimming with gratitude. He knew that no matter how difficult the road ahead, he wouldn't have to face it alone. Together they had taken the first step toward rewriting their fate, toward transforming the village, and perhaps even the world they had once known. After the series of unimaginable events, the atmosphere in Yulee village began to shift noticeably. The villagers, who once regarded David with suspicion and resentment, now looked at him with a quiet reflection. No longer was he seen as an outsider or an intruder. Gradually, they began to see in him not an enemy, but a survivor. Someone who fought for his life and dared to stand firm against an overwhelming force. Linda, the girl once revered as the daughter of the snake goddess, was no longer seen as a mystical being embodying divine power. She was no longer the serpent who transformed into a human. Now, she was just one of them, a member of the community. Her return was not only a redemption for David, but also a symbol of reconciliation, something that had never been imagined in the village before. The tale of the snake goddess, once told with dread and trembling reverence, was now retold with respect and hope. The villagers no longer spoke in hushed tones about curses or divine punishment. Instead, they embraced the idea of harmony between nature and humanity. Change had come to Yulee, not just through Amanda's heartfelt words, but through her unwavering courage, love, and forgiveness, qualities that inspired a transformation in everyone. David didn't know what the future held, but he realized that he no longer lived in the shadows of fear and despair. He understood that no matter how difficult life became, love and forgiveness were the most powerful weapons against darkness. And in this moment, he knew one thing for certain. He had changed. He was no longer just someone fighting to survive. He had become someone who believed that forgiveness could reshape the world. In the days that followed, Yulee began to witness remarkable changes. Community meetings, once dominated by maintaining order and assigning blame, evolved into gatherings where people shared hopes and dreams for a peaceful future. Stories of the snake goddess were no longer told with fear but with reverence and gratitude. The villagers began searching for ways to coexist with the forces of nature instead of resisting them. At these meetings, David and Amanda saw a growing openness among the villagers. Gone were the angry glares. They were replaced by acceptance and understanding. The community began to realize that life wasn't solely about confrontation, but about learning, forgiving, and coexisting. It was this forgiveness that opened the door to a brighter future, one where the shadows of the past no longer ruled. For David and Amanda, their purpose became clear. They could not only transform their own lives, but also help reshape this community. Although the road ahead remained uncertain, they had found faith in the power of love and forgiveness. One day, when stories of the snake goddess are shared without fear but with respect, they will know that their mission is complete. The bond between David and Amanda transcended mere personal affection. It became a guiding light for their greater battles. Together they fought not only for themselves but also for the values they believed in: peace, forgiveness, and mutual respect. Their conversations were no longer confined to personal struggles, but expanded to include ways they could make the world a better place. David realized that love had carried him through trials that once seemed insurmountable. Amanda, with her unwavering strength and determination, had become his indispensable partner in this journey. Together, they built not just a future for themselves, but for the entire community, even for those who had once turned their backs on them. As peace gradually returned to the village, and as lessons of forgiveness and compassion were passed on, they came to understand a profound truth. While the world is often harsh and filled with challenges, love and perseverance can bring about extraordinary change. Yet, despite the progress, David and Amanda knew there were still unanswered questions. How would they continue to build a future in a community once divided by myths and fears? How could they maintain harmony when the shadows of the past still lingered? What they knew for certain was that their journey was far from over. Challenges, temptations, and the mysteries of this world would not easily relent. But the most important lesson they had learned was this: as long as they held on to their faith in each other, in love and in forgiveness, every challenge could become an opportunity to rise above. David and Amanda knew their story was just beginning, and the most important thing they could do now was to hold on to hope and never lose faith in a brighter future. This story is far from over. The future of David, Amanda, and the village of Uli awaits further discovery. What do you think about the lessons we've explored together? Do you believe love and forgiveness can and truly transform everything, as in this story? Share your thoughts in the comments below this video. If this story inspired you, don't forget to like and share it with your friends to spread the powerful message of forgiveness and peace. Subscribe to the channel for more stories where we continue to explore profound values and timeless lessons. If you're part of the African American community, share this story with your friends, family, and loved ones across the United States to preserve and celebrate these rich folklore traditions. Remember, change begins with us.